This is Marketing Uncomplicated. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the show. Today, I have Dr. Formal, PhD, who is a licensed clinical psychologist and a credential alcohol and substance abuse master counselor. So CASAC, MC. He is licensed in New York, New Jersey, Washington, D.C., and is a PsyPAC certified, allowing him to serve patients in nearly 40 states, which is truly amazing. With experience across psychiatric inpatient units, college counseling centers, neuropsychological services, and emergency psychiatric care, he specializes in supporting high-performing individuals, elite athletes, and those facing substance use challenges. Dr. Formal is also deeply involved in sports psychology, working with Team USA, super awesome, and serving as the mental health director of Maccabi USA. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join us, Dr. Formal. So I want to get into the conversation as to really what drove you in terms of your why to start what you started, and then let's build onto the path of really getting into like who you serve currently today.
Yeah. So one thing that I realized very early on is that there are a lot of people in this life that are um, they're dehumanized in one way, shape, or form, and that can take two directions: either dehumanized in terms of they're considered bad, and so they're treated as less than human, or someone can be treated as superhuman because they're really good at something and therefore not recognized for any insecurities, doubts, troubles, difficulties. And the latter is what got me into working with athletes in depth, because in so many instances they're looked at as almost superhuman for their performance in their respective sport, that they're not looked at as also people, individuals with difficulties, challenges, troubles, and problems. And so wanting to the best of my ability, help engage with that human side was sort of what got me into this space.
No, I love that. And I love the aspect of when you say, tell us a little bit more about that two-way kind of street where you talked about the folks that are less than, and where do they predominantly like rise from, and then the ones that are considered to be good and like at what they're doing, but then it's like people don't realize what's behind the scene, which are the high performing folks that you talk about. But it's like the recognition of those two, and where does it stem from? I think from a psychological standpoint is the question.
So why people are idealized and other people are shamed?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I think in many ways, I think it's a fantastic question, by the way, something that I've wrestled with a
Yeah.
lot. And so the best that I've been able to come up with is really that it's about identification with the self, that in some ways we want to believe or tell ourselves a story that there's no way we can be like this other person who is, struggling with problematic substance use. And there's no way that we can have these kinds of mental health disorders, and sort of a mental distancing of sort from the recognition that sometimes people can just find themselves in really bad circumstances. And I think that that distancing leads people to feel like disgust or to treat people as less than in some way, to help themselves deal with any fears that they might too find themselves in that situation at some point in life, or a loved one,
Yeah.
and that they're somehow different or inoculated from it. And then I think, on the other hand, there's that identification with, one's aspirations, one's best self, and thinking, oh, I wish I could be more like this person, and to emulate them, to admire them, to think of them as this perfect individual that has
Mm.
somehow made it in some way, and therefore they are no longer subject to or susceptible to the typical problems that everyone else experiences or feels.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, living in New York, I think that you see a lot of high performing folks, and a lot of them at times can have their own issues that they deal with. And I'm not saying that a majority of them can tend to like go into substance abuse, but I think I think both, and correct me if I'm wrong, but both ends kind of suffer from the high pressure which leads them into something and a direction that isn't great, right? And it's almost like that path is quite similar.
It really can be that in both circumstances, I think people find themselves in a position where they don't recognize the full consequences of going along a certain pathway or a certain direction in life. And therefore, as a result, they try to figure out different ways to cope with their experience. And so, whether it be substance use or Netflix or some sort of streaming service, fantasy novels, video games. There are all of these different ways in which people tune out. And that is usually, I think, a symptom of uh, feeling stuck in one's environment and not knowing how to get out. And
Yeah.
so that is what I call often like an avoidance coping strategy.
Hmm.
And so, that can sort of cycle. And so if someone, for instance, is, miserable at their job, or miserable with their job, and doesn't like what they're doing and is feeling really frustrated and doesn't see like an easy way out because they have, I don't know, whether it's certain financial obligations or they don't see an easy direction to transition, that, they might turn to something that helps them to kind of numb their experience, and that sort of cycles because as soon as the numbing wears off, that feeling that dissatisfaction comes back, and so
Hmm.
it sort of has this way of just perpetuating itself or
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, from what you see now in terms of the way our world is going, I mean, there's so many directions we could take this question, this Q&A, in terms of, what is happening to the human mind and, where are trailing off in a way, if you will, but how and what has the increase? I guess what I'm trying to ask is, has it really been a steep incline upwards towards maybe the boomers, in terms of what we're utilizing today to kind of like escapism, whether it's spending x amount of time scrolling. I mean, we all know that things like social media have been attributed to certain different like depressions and so on and so forth in different categories of teens and onwards, but it's like, is that trail upward really steep, considering maybe from our parents' time to like our boomers or even before the boomers? I mean, what are you seeing today really, and where do you think this is going, or will we kind of plateau and go back down again? Because there was an interesting result of um, like the purchase of alcohol has declined so much more in what is it, the Gen X compared to like boomers, which I thought was fascinating. But it's the more you see these commercials coming up of non-alcoholic beverages, they're really tuning into that generation.
yeah, I think you did a really great job with sort of some of the trends that we're seeing throughout society. I think the easier coping strategy is to access. And
Hmm.
use substance use again. How readily available it is, how cheap it is, how effective it is, how quickly it works, impacts how often people will utilize it. But I think there is also a recognition for many that it's a short-term strategy. And so I think you are seeing in certain ways a counterbalancing force to some of the ways in which people cope with with some form of numbing. Um, and so whether that be mindfulness retreats, I think there's been an explosion of whether it be yoga or mindfulness, meditation, etc., turning off of phones, um, or yes, reduction in alcohol use, which I think is part, a response to, the amount of stimulation we're getting on a regular basis, but also I think has to do with just what we're learning about alcohol.
Hmm.
You should forget which governmental division said it's the FDA.
Oh, the
Uh,
report that came out saying that it's actually worse for you than not.
yes, that the degree in which it causes cancer
Hmm.
much higher than previously recognized. And so it's starting to be treated a little bit more like cigarettes. Um,
Hmm.
and I think in many ways it's a good thing that we are being more informed about, you know, what are the consequences of what we do with our time and
Yeah, no, totally. So in actuality, I mean, I don't know if you have the statistic, but you do think that the increase is pretty steep then in terms of folks that are utilizing a way of escapism just because of the like social media being born, just so many other ways in which we're stimulated, from the morning. It's like I think it's an addiction. I mean, even for myself, it's I don't want to get on my Instagram account from the second I wake up in the morning, but it's a trigger, and I don't know what that is triggering in me, because I think I have diluted a bunch of other sort of influencers and really kept my Instagram feed to more educational and what's going on in the news. But that also can have a tendency to stimulate the mind in a negative manner to start off in the day, correct?
Yes, 100%. And this was a big part of the research I did for my dissertation. And so it founds on a theory called self-determination theory. It's a
Okay.
theory of motivation. And what it does is it talks about motivation not in terms of merely high or low, which is sort of a very simplistic formulation, but it really talks about motivation being intrinsic, those things that we do for itself just because we like it,
Yeah.
and those things that are extrinsically motivating, things that we do as a means to an end. So, you know, one doesn't have to tell a child to play, they just do. That's intrinsic. That's something that they just feel compelled, as opposed to something that's extrinsic, where, if you are being paid to do a job that you don't like, that would be extrinsic. You're doing it for the means to the end of the being able to live. Or if you are guilted into going to a party or an event, that would be a form of extrinsic motivation.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
so, the research has shown that if someone is able to pursue mostly their intrinsic interests, and to be mostly intrinsically motivated, their well-being is a lot better than those who are mostly extrinsic. And it highlights the three basic psychological needs that need to be fulfilled. And when they're not, people tend to engage in these need substitutes. And so the three basic psychological needs are autonomy, feeling of agency in your life, competence, feeling like you're getting better at something, and relatedness, feeling like you're connecting to important others.
Mm-hmm.
And when those needs are not met, people tend to seek need substitutes. So when someone, to your point about Instagram, um, that if someone is feeling maybe a dearth of connection to others, that is a need substitute. It's a way of feeling somewhat connected, even if it isn't the same degree of connectedness that one would from calling up a friend or being in person with other people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Maybe it's about competence and you're feeling bad about yourself. So you look at maybe certain inspirational content. And so all of these things can be representative of unmet needs
Mm-hmm.
when social media is not used in an adaptive way. When
Mm-hmm.
it's used in an adaptive way, it's serving to fulfill those needs as opposed to being need substitutes. But that gray line can really get blurred.
Yeah. So when you actually dig in, whether it's the data that you've looked at or from patient to patient, do you think that majority of these underlying issues, or I wouldn't want to necessarily say issues, but underlying maybe causes that happen for a human being to be triggered to go in one direction or another, that stem, how far back does that stem? Does that stem from an incident in childhood, like teenage years? Is it something profound that kind of then uprises once triggered in a certain time in their life?
I I think it really depends. I think
Yeah.
all of those are possibilities. It's very hard to quantify what it means to any individual to
Yeah.
have something happen, because we have to always understand it in its context. That um, if someone has a history of, or if someone has been in a war situation and they're walking down the streets of New York and they hear a car backfire, they
Hmm.
might hit the deck. And that is life sustaining based off of their circumstances of what it meant to be in a war situation and to duck and cover right away.
Hmm. Hmm.
Whereas people who are used to the city and haven't been in that kind of situation are maybe less likely to do so if they haven't had other events that were maybe startling in their past, where they felt like it was adapted to them in some way to avoid.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. So let's kind of steer in the direction. Obviously, you're working or have been working with Team USA, which is super awesome, and really kind of the executive kind of folks that are in that mindset of like high pressure. I mean, athletes compared to like C-suite level, like, executives kind of have the same like mentality in terms of goal setting, goal achieving, and maybe a different degree of like stressors, but in line and walking in parallel with those kind of stressors. So walk us through a little bit how you work with these different types of clientele in terms of getting them to where they need to be and surpassing their whatever they're feeling. I mean, I don't want to call it flaws, but it's like, whatever is depressing them from thinking that they cannot achieve or cannot move forward in a certain direction. But I'd love to hear, the different types of case studies in terms of how you work with them.
Yeah, I again depends on the individual. So I'll preface with that, but
Yeah.
I think a big part of really working deeply with some of these individuals is about recognizing what their why is and
Mm,
why they do what they do,
I love that.
and being able to use that as the core behind how to motivate them forward. Because we all have fears when we are attempting things that we feel are on the edge of our capacities. But that is one of the most beautiful things about why certain people like really aspire to do, you know, large goals, for lack of a better phrase. And
Yeah.
so sometimes people get focused on the fear element of what happens if I fail, what happens if I don't do well, what happens if this deal does not work out well, what happens if I don't make it. And so that that mindset can be so detrimental because it's antithetical to what got them there in the first place. Because we can all focus in on the reasons why something might not work, but if we do that, it prevents us from really pursuing those goals that has us excited about life.
Yeah.
And so to be able to really hone in on what excites us as opposed to what happens if it goes wrong. And when you look at the research, there was this lifetime study research where they followed people over the course of 50 years. Please don't quote me on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and they asked these elderly people, um, you know, how do you feel about life? What are your biggest regrets? And they were then more often than not, it was not the things that they tried and failed at, but it was the things that they never tried at all. That they
Mm.
wish they would have, explored it, and didn't. And so that was like a common theme amongst many of these elderly people. Is like, I wish I would have asked this person out. I wish I would have pursued this business. I wish I would have, gone for this achievement that I didn't, at the expense of, doing something more practical, doing something more stable or lower risk.
Hmm. So would you then think that the common factor between athletes and high performing like executives or C-suite level folks in their industries have that same level of I think I can't achieve on a consistent basis? Do you think that that's kind of like a through line between the two of them, or the fear of?
I think, you know, when people experience burnout or like the biggest difficulties, it is often when what is dominating their thinking is one of those means to an end kind of
Mhm,
things, this
mhm.
extrinsic motivation that I talked about, or sort of not, like a fear of not achieving, as opposed to those intrinsic things of like, I really like doing these deals. I really like getting good at this sport. I really like, improving over time. And so I think of the people that end up struggling the most, yes, that I think I can't, and that self doubt is often what's driving it. And that's when they're finding me. That the
Mhm,
people
mhm.
who just love their sport in an uncomplicated way,
Yeah.
they're not the ones that end up coming into my office,
Yeah.
usually,
Yeah,
unless it's something new.
yeah. And I love that you bring up, like, if they enjoy it in an uncomplicated way, because I think the goal settings, I don't want to say that goal settings make things complicated, but they add a layer of stress to whatever you're doing, whether it's, like, to your point, like crushing deals, sales, like, making sure you're going to you're going to take your team to, like, the winning chapter or whatever it is, right? Or if you're an individual, if you're a sports person that isn't that's not in a team setting, but it's more individualistic. Um, it just adds that layer of complexity when there is that high striving achievement, versus somebody who's just doing it for fun.
Yes, and self-determination research shows that when someone is doing something that they intrinsically love, and then they suddenly get extrinsic motivators on top, that their total motivation does not really go up; it actually goes down a little bit. And so
Interesting.
those things that brought someone in the first place in a less complicated way, when all of these things, well, I need to do well not only because I love it, but because you know my fans are counting on me, or my family, I'm trying to provide for my family, or any other reason, my agent will be upset, or that or my parents will be disappointed. Those are the things that actually decrease one's motivation
Hmm.
often.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so it it helps to be able to stay in touch with those things that really matter most, and people call it like the pure joy or the love
Yeah.
of the,
Yeah.
because when goals are set in a way that are one's own barometer, which I think is really important, as opposed to comparing oneself to others, because I'm all of 5'6". If I compare myself to LeBron James in
Yeah.
basketball, it's an unfair comparison at the very start, just because height is such a factor.
Yeah.
So what I want to be able to do is, rather than set myself up for a standard that is unachievable, being able to say, well, based off of where I am now, how is it that I'm improving over time? Can I make my a better free throw percentage? Can I improve my footwork? Can I do these things that are objective metrics that I can measure myself on my own barometer and feel like I'm improving? There
Hmm.
was like a social learning theorist named Lev Vygotsky, and he talked about the idea of social scaffolding, that the
Okay.
mark of a really great teacher, and something that I think a lot of high achieving people internalize for themselves, is the idea that if a goal is too low, um, people get bored,
Yeah.
or a child would get bored, and they give up. There's no point in doing it. If a goal is way too hard, people get frustrated and they
Hmm.
give up. And so the art of making really good goals are ones that feel like a good reach, not so high that they're insurmountable and not so low that they're easy. And so a great mentor, a great coach, a great um, helping figure is one who can set the bar in a way that continues to make those real reaches,
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
that people feel like it's still something achievable, but not something that's overwhelming.
Yeah. No, I like that. And as you were talking, what I was thinking about was, so I mean, it took a special character to get to that high executive role. It took a special person to get to that C-suite role. It took a special person to get into Team USA, or, to crush a gold medal, or, to take their team to the winning end. So they must have been enjoying something with a lot less pressure as they were leading up to that position. And I want to dive into a little bit about the psychology behind that, that you are here, there is that goal up here, and then there's this exponential drive and not giving up. But then why then does the fear build up at this peak versus when you're driving up to that peak, and then it's almost like freak out moment. I've reached to where I want to reach, and now I'm going to have panic attacks.
Yeah, I think for all of us, the freak out is about what does it mean to get to one's full potential,
Yeah.
whatever that looks like. And so if someone is, you know, advancing in whatever they're doing, whether it be in the business world or on the sports field, that there is this recognition that I have further to go. And so I think there is a fear when we put ourselves, you know, in the face of competition. It's about really asking yourself, um, you know, can I really get the best of myself? And so it's very different than when one is just, let's say, playing baseball, that, hitting with your friends, getting a little bit better, improving over time, versus what it means to get to the MLB and have someone throwing a 95 mile per hour fastball, you
Yeah.
know, at you. To be able to say, um, you know, it's not just about getting to that point, but it's about staying there,
Hmm.
and how to, one, stay motivated to be there, but also how to maintain that focus. Because if you take that same MLB player and bring them down to, a lower level of baseball, it's very easy for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't have to think. But once you're getting to this level that you are reaching your capacities, then it is this recognition. How do I stay there? How do I continue to improve? Is there room to improve? And that can lead to a lot of doubts about a person who has had this history, and trajectory of success for so long, to say, oh my gosh, is there this point that I'm going to reach where I'm no longer improving, or I can no longer be better than those other people?
Do you also then think that there is this level of, especially with these type of, high performing folks, that once they reach that level, it's the endorphins of also moving on from like what's next and kind of never enjoying that peak that they've hit, and finding something else where they can go back down again, struggle to get back up to that peak. And it's that enjoyment of that cycle of, okay, I've achieved this, go back down, achieve this, go back down, achieve this, and the continuation. I mean, that's also some kind of an addiction as well, correct?
It, I, I think, maybe obsessive like is a better way to put it,
Yes.
because often with addiction, um, addiction is often characterized by its reduction in functioning in a person's world. And
Yes.
so that's the slight
Absolutely.
distinction I want to make, because, if someone has, I don't know, a glass of beer every day, right? Or two, that if it's not impacting their health, and it's not impacting their savings in a significant way,
Slowing them
their
down.
work functioning, what?
Slowing them down.
Right. If it's not impacting their work functioning, if it's not impacting their family life, if it's not impeding what it is that they want to do, if they're not experiencing, you know, um, blackouts or hangovers, then we don't tend to call it an addiction, even if, one is drinking. Let's say it's three drinks a day times 7 days a week is 21 drinks, is a reasonable amount of drinking.
Yeah.
But what we always ask with addiction is how much and to what degree it's impacting a person's function.
Yes.
That if the athletics are something that ends up taking something away from a person's life as opposed to enhancing it, that's when it can border into that addiction.
Hmm.
So if someone keeps competing even though they keep getting injured, or if initially it was a source of socialization, and then they realize that, practicing all of the time takes them away from family and friends or other activities they want to do, it can almost tilt into this like addictive like,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, experience.
Yeah. No, thank you for correcting that. What then happens post, when an athlete's career ends or an executive career ends, right? I mean, we've all heard that, a lot of athletes, not we've all heard, but I mean, if you're into reading these type of statistics and data, which I am very much so, in terms of, you know, ever eternal peak, a lot of them tend to either go into depression. What is the kind of post high level peak where, maybe they aren't the type of person that goes back down? Yes, a lot of athletes go into, doing things for their communities, starting a business. So there's still this sense of accomplishment, but what do you see that folks go through, and or like athletes or C-suite level folks do go through from that standpoint? And what is kind of like that guidance in terms of, moving them through their life? Because a lot of athletes end their career in their maybe mid-30s
or earlier.
or
Yeah, and
earlier.
that is that is a great question.
Yeah.
So yeah, given that we don't have all day to talk about just this topic, I
Yeah.
will try to summarize it in a reasonable way.
Yeah.
But so what I would say is that there are a few different elements to it. I'll start on the athlete side, and then
Mm-hmm.
I'll talk more about like the C-suite executive side. So from the athlete side, one is, yes, the career is very short. In the big four professional sports, the average career is maybe 3 to 4 years.
Wow.
So not everyone is Tom Brady with a 20-year career.
Sure.
And then when you look at some of the people who are Olympians, like the average gymnast retires before like 24. Most Olympians are not, well before 24. Most gymnasts are not like a Simone Biles. So that for many of these people, they are living in a very structured life. Their whole lives are revolving around their performance in sport. So that is not only training, not only competitions and travel related to those competitions, but it's what they eat, how they sleep, how they stretch, where they spend their time. Are they getting homeschooled? Are they dealing with coaches, trainers, athletic trainers, etc.? So everything is so structured, so regimented that they don't really have to make many decisions in a lot of ways about what they're doing next.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything revolves around what they're doing for their respective sport. And so when they find themselves in retirement, the first element is they're going from this huge structure built in with all of these people that they're connected with, whether it be coaches, trainers, etc., or teammates or other competitors, to none of that structure in place at all. And what it means to build a structure of your own in the face of all of that being stripped away. The other major component is just how involved for an athlete their body is and how they're cultivating their body to express itself in sport. And so what it means for an athlete when they're not training in the same way, to how they have a relationship with their body after their sport is over. So if you have a sport that has you develop yourself in one way or in an imbalanced way, like an archery, for instance, or a tennis, that one side of your body might be more built up than the other. And so I often ask athletes, how do you want to cultivate your body based off of what you want to do with it right now?
Mm-hmm.
And how is that different than when you were in sport? And for some high performing female athletes, sometimes it means that, certain, there are certain hormonal changes where they might
Mm-hmm.
not have their periods for
Mm-hmm.
extended periods of time. And so learning to adjust to these changes that were sort of suppressed as a result of their, involvement in sport.
Yeah.
And so those are the components I think about with athletes. With C-suite people, I see it more of, because the life cycle can be so much longer than that of athletes. And, one can be C-suite in their 70s or 80s. So what it means to think about when someone retires, what challenges they're looking to take on. Because usually someone does not go into C-suite merely because they like working long hours. It's that there exists a certain challenge, problems that they'd like to solve,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to figure out what problems one wants to solve in this new environment. Is it working with charities and trying to solve or solve one of the things that's like an ill of one's community or the world, and wanting to do that. But I think there is, with a lot of C-suite, a healthy grandiosity around, how can I uniquely make this significant?
Yeah.
And so being able to how to transmogrify that into one's next stage.
Yeah. I love that you bring up the, the body aspect as it relates to athletes, because I mean, there's a huge mind body connection in this. In terms of leveling out yourself psychological as well. I mean, wouldn't you think so?
Yes.
Yeah, hugely. He plays a huge role, more than I think a lot of people like to think. So yeah, I mean, thank you for that. That was really helpful from that explanation. Um, I want to dive into a little bit, more interesting in terms of, as somebody kind of uncovers and discovers to find you, there is, like as you mentioned earlier, this huge boom of like retreats and so on. I think that are happening more so than, and I'm an '80s baby, so I've really seen a differentiation of, yes, yoga was around in the '70s, but it's becoming so much more vastly used. And I have to say, I definitely did a lot more yoga in New York than I do currently living in Miami, because for me, there
Yeah.
felt that there was a need to surrender my day at the end of maybe just being so stimulated, constantly from like work, just going out on the streets, the elements, you and the rain and the snow and whatever it was, and the subway and all that kind of stuff. But there are so many tools out there in terms of meditation. Now there's like, how to manifest, certain goals and so on and so forth. What is the direction from, let's say, John or Jane, they're going through whatever they're going through, athlete, C-suite, entrepreneur, how do they uncover, the type of questions, or like how do they ask themselves the type of questions to know which direction to go into, whether they do meditation, the working with you, or maybe manifesting and so on and so forth, or is there a combination of certain tools that have people utilize, but how do they find you? And I'm sure that there's a degree of interviewing these clients that come your way to know that they're in a right place to be a right match for you, so that there's a continuation for them and there isn't this stop, go, stop, go.
Yeah. So, in addition to my role as the director of mental health for Maccabi USA, where sometimes I'll get clients, and I'm also on I'm a preferred provider for um, uh, an elite athlete directory. Um, that really what I do to try to get clients and think about the right kind of clients and what they're thinking about is I think a little bit about I call it donut hole theory.
Okay.
That we have 360 degrees of perspective and a big hole in the middle.
Yeah.
That it's so hard for us to be both an observer and a participant in our own experience. And I think whether it be something like meditation or therapy, that it's a time for us to be able to pause on what we're doing and think more about, well, how do we go about thinking about what we're doing? And so using those times for pause are some of the things that I do in trying to help athletes or C-suites or entrepreneur folks to uh, really take a breath, take some time in the space of all of this activity, all of this doing, all of this energy that they're pouring into something to understand, well, is this a good direction for where you want to be, and get them to really check into, and to your point about like what questions you ask yourself, to really check into um, how does it feel for me to be engaging in this way? Like at the end of the day, am I experiencing uh, accomplishment, even if I'm maybe tired? Am I feeling proud of myself? Am I feeling vitality as a result? Am I excited to tell people about it? Or like, do I say, yes, I've given my all to it? Or is it the kind of thing where at the end of the day, I feel drained? I feel exhausted. I feel unhappy with where I'm at,
Mm-hmm.
or feeling like burnout, and being able to really tune into that feeling on a regular basis as one's north star, to kind of guide you in the direction that has this sort of sustainable feel to
Yeah. No, I mean, that's great, because I think that, working with somebody like you, and then, mind body connection of doing something, maybe there is the C-suite level that needs to take walks outside or, play tennis or like whatever it is to kind of supplement, I think is super interesting. I do want to dive in because I think if I, to talk a little bit about the younger generation in terms of, I think it's college counseling, correct? Um, because that is such a primal time in someone's age group, when as they're kind of growing. And I mean, what is the saying that your brain isn't fully developed? I think it's up until 25.
Yeah, 25, 27 for your prefrontal cortex. Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
So, what are the kind of, I guess, conversations that you have? Because there is goal setting there. There's ensuring that, that they finish school on time. I mean, my dad's like, I don't really care what you guys do, just as long as you guys finish in 4 years. Don't give me the 6 year situation unless it's like you're adding an MBA to it. So, um, what is the buildup, I guess, if you will? And maybe it's like you're catching these kids at a younger age. So it's like they're really developing that habit of working with somebody like you and forming their mind, because I think maybe and answer if I'm correct, but it's setting the stage for them from a foundational level as they go into potentially getting to that C-suite to be able to maintain that versus catching somebody who's already at the peak, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, I'm a big proponent of the phrase, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Yeah.
Um,
An ounce of
and
prevention is a pound of cure. I like that.
so, yeah, I think being able to help someone, and I think so much about, when I think about performance and all of these elements about really achieving something meaningful, that's about sustained effort over time.
Hmm.
To do any one of these, uh, tremendous accomplishments, to really be very ambitious and to reach for one's goals, it's a marathon, not a sprint. It's something that you have to be doing on a near daily basis, over an extended period of time, where you're improving, where you're learning. And so if one is orienting oneself towards, um, something that is sustainable in nature, then someone is much less likely to burn out, to stop, to feel, um, disengaged. And so, for me, what I try to get people to do is like really hone in on, and it doesn't have to be a very specific job or a very specific activity, but knowing the kinds of jobs, the kinds of activities that really get people energized, that really get people to tune in, the things that they find themselves doing in their free time, when they have free time, that, the kinds of patterns that they want to be able to repeat over and over again. I believe Simon Sinek, who talked about,
Hmm.
the infinite game and wanting to play infinite.
Hmm.
And so if people are, able to identify, label, recognize those infinite games that they want to play, and keep themselves, oriented in that direction, it is much more likely that they are going to have success and feel, satisfaction and well-being as a result.
Yeah.
And so it's really about helping people label what it is that they want, and kind of direct them there,
Yeah. So
and
then
letting them
to
express it.
just, oh, okay. So to close out that question, do you think that kids in college are at an advantage when they start earlier with this process than somebody later on in the game? Or do you think it can be sort of, it's not that they've lost out, but that there's still growth from there, somebody who's already at the C-suite level versus somebody in college?
Yeah, I think college tends to be a pretty good time for one to like start to understand that. And I think, at its best, college, going to a university, spending time away from home, taking a smattering of classes, is really about getting in touch with that, and then learning the kinds of habits like time management, like, creating, priorities, and recognizing what it is that you really like, um, that can help set the tone going forward. If someone figures it out a little later or a little earlier, that's okay. But, being able to develop those habits
Mhm.
is so crucial.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, sometimes I'm like, oh, if I was the way I was, if I was the way I was today and I knew what I knew today in my 20s, oh, I'd be so much more advanced, like further on in my life and career. There's the I wish, I guess, already creeping in. Um, Adam, this has been super informal, but before I let you go, I do want to ask you to leave us with three things that somebody either thinking about, you know, dipping into something like this and, having a support system, similar to you should be thinking about, no matter where they are in their life, but to really ask themselves those questions, the direction that they should be going.
Yeah. I would say uh, one is I think the most important thing is finding people who you feel you can get along with and can help you. That if you do not feel comfortable being vulnerable with that person, if you do not feel comfortable sharing certain things with a certain person, or you just don't feel like a sense of connection, um, it's likely that you will not have the kind of progress that you're looking for. So really vetting someone and making sure they're the kind of person that you feel can help you take those steps and that you feel comfortable taking those steps with. I think that's a huge part of it, because when one finds a good mentor, right, it's often a balance, or a therapist or a coach, that it's this balance between um, that unconditional support that you get, but also the ability to allow someone to really thrive on their own terms. That in therapy, I when I'm working with patients, I always want to say, this is not your life by Adam. This is your life by you,
Hmm.
and how I can help facilitate that. And so that's why I always go back to focusing on the patient's agents, and what they want for themselves, and how we can think through things together so they feel as clear-minded as possible to pursue the things.
Hmm. Hmm.
So if they're out of any questions, I would say that's probably the most important. And then the other is to really touch base with oneself about what you want to do, what you really like to do, how you like to exist in the world. Um, is that about collaborating with others? Is that about competing? Is that about um, building something? That recognizing what those patterns are, and then seeing what are the well-worn paths, what are maybe the not so well-worn paths, and how do you um, find yourself into something that you would want to do irrespective of the outcome. And if you can find those kinds of spaces, you tend to be more likely to be invested and persist in the face of difficulties, because there inevitably will be.
Hmm.
And so it's not a question of if, it's more of a matter of when,
When?
more often than not. And so you might as well be doing something that you're really passionate about, and find yourself against the kinds of challenges that you're really looking to find on some level, than ones that you don't.
Yeah. No, I like that. It's definitely true with entrepreneurs. Don't start something unless you're really passionate about taking it to the end, because there will be road bumps. That's for sure. Yeah. Again, thank you, Adam. Dr. Adam, I should say, this has been really fantastic. I appreciate your time and your insight. I feel like you and I could dig into so many other different subject matters. So maybe we'll have you back on the show so we can dive into those.
Sounds great. It was such a pleasure, Sasha.
Likewise.